Our next panel is about enabling agile and resilient citizen services. And on the panel are Linus Tham, Group Chief Information Officer at IHH Healthcare Berhad, Jason Bay, Senior Director, Government Digital Services, GovTech Singapore, Sim Sikut, Government CIO at Estonia, Alvin Tan, Regional Vice President of Tanium, Prem Pavan, Area Vice President and GM of Asia Citrix, and your moderator for this session is the Assistant Chief Executive at Media and Innovation at IMDA Singapore, Howie Lau.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's exciting to be part of this panel. And as Joe mentioned, we're going to try and make sure that we don't go into buzzwords. So for the panelists, we're going to try and do this. This is new to you guys. We're going to try and avoid words like unprecedented and the new normal.
Okay, well, you just said it.
Yeah, so we'll try. But it's great that we have this wonderful panel set up by CIO Academy, because the governments and organizations like healthcare have been in the forefront in terms of managing the citizen services. And obviously, many of these organizations have to take a bifocal approach, both in terms of managing their immediate needs, but at the same time, looking at planning ahead, because things continue to be uncertain. So hopefully through this panel, we'll get a sense from the panelists in terms of what have they been doing in terms of managing the immediate needs, but at the same time, how do they plan ahead to build new muscles, new capability as we continue to navigate this storm. So great to have our panelists today. Maybe Linus will start with you, because healthcare is front and center. Because every other news articles, especially at the beginning, was all about healthcare. Perhaps you could share with us in terms of, from your organization, how did technology play a part to help you with your pivots? Mm-hmm. And perhaps the second part is, more importantly, what are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Okay. Well, so thanks, Howie, and glad to be here. So really for us, one of the things that happened was really nothing happened. Because healthcare carries on, right? So circuit breaker, work from home, for the bulk of our business, it carries on. So what did happen that we needed to turn around quickly, and I guess for Singapore and for some of our markets in particular, where we, like China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, having gone through SARS, meant that a lot of the BCP programs were in place. What we just kicked in very quickly was the additional need for kind of registration, contact tracing, temperature controls and all that. So that happened, and that was a quick response. But beyond that, what was different this time around was that the back office, people in the HQ, corporates and all that, the way we had to change and responded, and technology immediately stepped in, was that we can now immediately have all these necessary separation, team A, team B, and then thereafter circuit breaker, work from home. And indeed, it was enabled by technology. During SARS, it was not possible. Right, so this time around it was enabled. We could very quickly respond to that. So business and life went on. Having said that, clearly one of the big things that's impacted for us in private healthcare, a significant proportion of our patient load and hence the business comes from foreign patients. Right, so it's a situation where now it's not just about making money. How do we ensure the patients remain well? They used to fly in from Indonesia to Singapore or to Malaysia, Penang and all that. They go in morning, get all their checkups, see the doctor, take their medication, go back. Same day. Now they can't do that. I mean, can you imagine coming in 14-day quarantine before you see your doctor? So that's not possible. But how do we then ensure the patients are still looked after and they're well? So in came telecare, but of course, the quick response, depending on maturity and readiness of each market, is a situation wherein do we then go for really the Rolls-Royce fully secure setup and all the like some of things that you see in Singapore, Mana Doctor and Doctor Anywhere, which we actually invested in, but some of our markets were less ready. So it was a case of how do you be very agile with technology. Okay. Complement what you have with people. Don't aim for the perfection on day one. So we started, and in fact we were very quick to launch off the mark in all our markets, teleconsultation. Within realm of legal permissibility. So some countries say you can't see new patients, you can see follow-up. But we launched it whichever way we can. To secure it, we launched it on, for example, Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp calls and all that. But the call before actually taking on the patient, we launched it by having the people behind it. It's no different from calling up, making an appointment. We still call up, make an appointment, then we send you a link. So I know it's you as a patient. So that's kind of how very quickly we responded to get things up to speed in healthcare. Progressively, then you add other things and you start cleaning up, improving it along the way. So I think that's kind of roughly how we responded quickly to keep things going, and at the same time also maintain our relationship with our patients and learn along the way. So that's still the journey we're going through.
Cool. Were there particular challenges that you saw that it's worth mentioning?
Well, for one thing in particular was actually nobody really knew what they can or cannot do, right? So in certain cases, Malaysia as an example, they actually don't have, in Singapore we have Sandbox to provide telecare, and that was available even before COVID hit, right? So we could actually ride on the Sandbox and provide some of the services. Malaysia actually did not have any such thing. So by law, you're not allowed to do teleconsultation. So we were trying to figure out, so we asked the authorities. The authorities were saying, okay, I'm not sure, I have to ask this other body, that other body. So eventually we settled on, okay, let's not call it consult for a start. We'll call it a tele-chat. So it allowed us to get in touch with the patient. And the thing is, healthcare, unfortunately, you can't surgically operate from home yet. So it's a situation where we say, okay, look, patient, if you really need to come in, you need to come in, but at least I can maintain that you are well. Over time, the laws start changing. They catch up. They say, okay, no, we have to continue. We have to allow for some of these things to happen. Likewise in India, likewise in Turkey, right? So some of those things were, when you're kind of ahead when you're trying to do some of these things, the governments are not ready. The laws are not ready. Some laws are not written for it. At the same time, it's also a change of people's mindset. In the past, there have been fear sometimes from doctors in terms of medical legal issues. Am I going to be liable if I make a decision without actually seeing the patient? But it doesn't really change care that much. Ultimately, if you see a patient, even in your office, if you're not certain enough to make a decision, you will not make the decision. You will ask the patient to go for tests, go for various things. You will ask for a referral. So that hasn't changed. So if we see a patient online and, well, I can't make a decision, I'm sorry, you got to come in. Okay. Of course, CMCO in Malaysia, circuit breaker, those things became a problem. But no matter how you lock down, clinical care as an emergency is still allowed, right? So at least that part carried on.
Cool. Well, Linus, thanks so much for that. So maybe staying on the topic of technology, because as an enabler, because you shared that processes were in place, obviously mindset and regulations continue to be challenges regardless of how you use technology. But perhaps staying on technology, we'll move to Jason from GovTech, because GovTech has been at the forefront, and you guys have introduced a lot of very exciting technology and useful technology like contact tracing. And as a user of it, I saw the speed in which it was implemented, but at the same time, the improvements that came on a regular basis. Perhaps you could share with us in terms of how do you guys from GovTech look at the approach and thinking about how do you actually think about using technology, deciding what to focus on, what not to focus on, and how do you adjust? But before you answer, Jason, I'd like to just remind the audience that do key in your questions, because we'll try and save about 10 minutes or so right at the end to take some of your questions for our panelists as well. So Jason, perhaps over to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, actually, I don't know that there is a nice ex-ante framework that we think about when we come to this crisis, right? COVID-19 hit us all in the beginning of this year. I think it was all hands on deck, and it's all hands on deck not just from the tech perspective, right, but from the ops perspective. You're talking about public health. You're talking about MOM, the Manpower Ministry, the Trade and Industry Ministry, and all these other ministries providing social assistance, job support, grant disbursements, licenses, applications, and things like that, right? So it's just really been all hands on deck. And I think the challenge has been, in the earlier session, I think Celine was talking about the difficulties with business process re-engineering and how it's a human issue most of the time and not a technical issue. And I think that's very much true for most of the solutions we've rolled out, right? It's about ops tech integration. It's about helping the operational agencies to better deploy technology. If you want to take contact tracing in particular, right? Trace Together, which I'm really familiar with, was never planned for. It was something that we brought to the table during the pandemic. And so when you think about how to integrate that into a system of systems to manage public health, to manage infectious disease outbreaks, it hadn't been done, and we had to do this dynamically. And I think there are a couple of, I wouldn't say principles, but I think a couple of enablers that allowed us to do this, right? So I think the first is simply that we've been investing in engineering capabilities in government for some time now, right? So building that up, having the capacity to build some of these solutions in-house. Trace Together, if you want to look at that, was built in 8 weeks. Safe Entry was built in a similar span of time. We stood up a WhatsApp and Telegram an account, to disseminate public information quickly and to combat misinformation that was going out there. All of these things was just rolled it out really quickly, and we had the capability in government to do that. Then I think there's also collaboration between public and private sectors, right? Again, when we launched, and this is slightly out of my domain of expertise, I know that MOH was, besought with tons of companies, innovators, all suggesting different ways of doing things. Now, there's a competency trap here. You're in the middle of a crisis. You have some tried and tested solutions. There are some new solutions that are coming up that purport to be, more expeditious, more efficient, more productive, and things like that. How do you make the decision? And that is a difficult a choice to be trading off, right? So you've got to have the relationships, you've got to have the domain understanding. You need a combination of the technical competence, but you also need people to understand what's available and to work across organizational boundaries and silos to put the final solution together. So we've had to, collaborate quite extensively across government. And I think the last enabler I would point to is maybe on the citizenry side. We've rolled out a number of solutions. The adoption rate has been fairly high, and I think we are lucky that in Singapore, the Edelman Trust Barometer actually showed that the trust in government, especially the handling of the COVID pandemic, actually increased over time. And that, I think, provides the foundation for us to be rolling out some of these initiatives. If you look at Trace Together, we've got 60% of the population onboarded as of now. And this trust is built on efforts that we've made. How IMDA has been very aggressive in promoting digital literacy, especially among the elderly, which also happens to be the population that is most adversely affected or at the greatest risk of adverse outcomes coming from a COVID infection, right? So we've got that foundation. I don't think there's any, ex-ante kind of principles or framework or nice, diagrams that we put together to map out our strategy. It's just been about execution, alignment of purpose, and just the daring do to try new things and adapt to changing demands. So I don't know if that's a full answer, but I give it a shot and happy to talk about this in further detail.
Well, thanks a lot, Jason. And I think what you described of, the road gets clearer as you walk is indeed important consideration. I think a lot of organizations go through it during this period because there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of unknowns. Yeah. And sometimes the best way is to start walking and then adjusting the course. So thanks for that, Jason. I think I think from Singapore to Estonia is probably a good segue. And Sim, Estonia is well known for digital government and the digital first approach. Perhaps you could share with us in terms of how did Estonia think about leveraging your digital first approach and combating the challenges that was faced in Estonia. But at the same time, we note that you also had a global hack in April 2020 to look at generating solutions for crisis. Could you share a bit in terms of how that went and what were some of the things that came out of it? It would be great to hear your perspective as well.
Thank you, and hope you hear me well. And well, here from Estonia, I can say good morning to you. Still, look, thank you for all the praise, and actually good to be with ConnectGov and the CIO Academy again after a few years. In Estonia, indeed, I think if you ask me this way, let's say, how were we able to sort of make use of digital first approach? Then clearly from without. Hopefully not bragging, but for us, I think the key outcome was that, look, we didn't have to do too much when the pandemic hit. And by that, I mean that, look, fundamentally, digital infrastructure, digital services have been built up to a level that we had been effectively working digital anyway, in government, as citizens in daily life, in many companies as well. So my point being that when we had to switch to remote work, remote study, I mean, there was just business as usual in some ways. Yes, of course, you had to beef up operationally. So we had to beef up, for example, that school systems or online learning systems could carry the load that was bigger than usual. But regardless, so I think what we really learned, and hopefully, was to say that look, it pays to be digital as a government, because you're ready for sort of whatever hits your way, at least sort of in real world. So if you had to work from a distance, sure, there was some things we still couldn't move online. So for example, we had to stop driving tests. So we still, unfortunately, don't accept you driving in a PlayStation, and that's okay to go on the street. But yeah, I mean, all the rest of the framework of government continued to work. Having said that, and I think a lot what we focus on the panel here as well is that obviously the immediate health response, we had to work with, and that's okay, because then exactly we had, I think, more time to focus on what we needed to do to solve this particular crisis and this particular issue in health wise and otherwise. And in that, exactly the sort of, I think we brought in the same principles or the same way of doing things as we have been using before. For example, yes, let's just do it. Let's figure out, let's see these things as a problems to be solved. So if we have to basically now fix this corona thing, okay, how can we fix this? And the second principle or approach we have relied a lot upon is collaboration. Collaboration with sort of whoever is there. So if we need to fix something, let's get ideas from other countries. Let's get experts in. Let's work with the developers and hackers and companies from the whole industry. And that really leads me to what you were asking, in a sense, why we moved fast also with a hackathon even. So essentially, I think it was 12th of March when it was announced that we will have, not a lockdown, but a special condition in the country. So, everybody has to do stuff from remote as much as they can. Next day, we started with a hackathon, going through the weekend to basically fix a few things that we still hadn't been able to figure out, like, corona mapping or some quick chatbots for crisis emergency information line, stuff like that. Concrete things we needed to come up really fast that had not been there at that now were this pandemic specific. And what came from this was such a good experience that actually many countries started following. So we are rather happy actually about that. So afterwards, the same sort of model of doing things quick and working very openly to fix the things we have at the hand with coronavirus moved to like 50 plus countries. And that led us to then trying stuff on a global level. So yes, in April, we arranged like a global hackathon. Some 12,000 people, I think, chipped in from 100 countries. And some very concrete, again, solutions came from this that were attempts to solve issues that are common across countries. Like, how do you manage the stockpile of, how do you even know and have an understanding of what's your stockpile of protective gear in the country? So a great solution was built up for that called Mask, that's now going into different countries and different sectors. And so my long story short, I think one thing is clearly we see that it pays to be digital, but everybody has to fix stuff. And in the fix stuff, the way that we have seen in our setup, how we can be so fast enough is, first of all, let's treat them as problems to be solved. Let's get cracking on them. And while cracking at them, let's be as open as we can, get folks in who can and are willing to contribute.
Got it. Well, Sim, thanks so much for that, because I think the 2 points you mentioned, which I caught, was about also experimenting and trying, but at the same time collaborating, because nobody has a monopoly of the best ideas and the best ways of solving it. And I think that I sense a very important message, because it is a time where we do see a lot of organizations coming together to try and figure it out. So thanks for that. We'll come back a little bit more, because you touched on a point which was kind of similar to what Linus talked about, to say that we didn't really have to change much, which kind of implies that you really built the muscle and was just adapting the muscle to this new. We'll come back to that in a while. But perhaps we'll move to Alvin, because in your presentation you talked about some of the security considerations and challenges. What we do know is that as things get hyper-connected, breaches increase, obviously.
Yes.
And we've seen an increase throughout this whole period. So it's not just on the B2B, but also including vulnerable groups. So perhaps, for organizations like Linus and Estonia and GovTech, there is adapting quickly, changing costs along the way. What are the challenges that you see, and how should they be thinking about security?
So thanks, Howie, for the question. I've been in cybersecurity now close to 20 years. We've lived through SARS, we've lived through the global financial crisis, and then, of course, today we are faced with a different crisis. The interesting thing we noticed was that back in 2008, when there was a global financial crisis, people were losing their jobs, and as they lose their jobs, they actually go to cyber criminal activities. And what that does is that we saw a spike, a 3 times, 4 times spike in cyber criminal activities since 2008. As the time went on, and we have digital transformation happening. A few things happened over the last few years. For example, you have software going out into the cloud. So your applications are leaving your data center and going into the cloud. Then your infrastructure is leaving your servers in the data center and it's actually going out into the cloud as well. As all that happens, this year what we saw is people starting to work from home. And that means that your end users are also now moving out of the data center. What we used to protect, which was the data center perimeter, is actually hollowing out in a way. And meanwhile, the cyber criminals are getting more and more organized. They are doing the entire stack. It used to be one group doing vulnerability research, another group doing malware activities, and so on. Now it's all one stack. It's an organized cybercrime activity. What that means is that we are faced with a very, very different world now, right? So for companies that have digitized, had a journey of digitization, so like Linus as an example, and like GovTech as an example, we have laid that foundation for a long time. So in a way, I would say cyber security is business as usual, except that you have to take care of the new, and the new is that the people are starting to work from home. So how do you take care of that new? We talked about intelligent age earlier. So we need the age to be a lot smarter. We need the age to be a lot quicker in responding. We need a few things. We need speed, we need agility to be able to manage this fast-changing world. And that is a new armory, I would say, that in cybersecurity, we always look for the new armory. What can we introduce into the whole ecosystem to make the system more secure? And we talk about data as well, right? So data is now moving out into the age. Data has gone into the software as a service, into infrastructure as a service, and finally now into the work from home computing. And of course, you need to now start to think, how do you protect that data? How do you get visibility fast so that you have control and be able to manage when attacks come from a different angle altogether? Yeah, so in cybersecurity, it's always a cat and mouse game. And in that game, we try to be ahead of the curve by enabling ourselves with new capabilities.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Alvin. Maybe just a segue and a little reminder to our audience. If you have questions, do post it to our Q&A. I'm starting to see quite a number of questions come in, but we'll definitely try and welcome more questions. So please send in the questions. So maybe what we'll do is that we'll move to Prem, because Alvin touched on a couple of things. He talked about, obviously, there's remote working. I think Linus, Sim, and Jason all talk about the spike in terms of critical services being needed. And obviously, quite a fair bit of infrastructure is getting cloud-based. I think from your perspective, could you share your thoughts in terms of how do you, in view of all these points, how does the organization keep governance, keep resiliency, and amidst all this different shifts that's happening?
Sure. So, I'll, just straight talking about the resiliency piece of it and what we've seen with our customers and with the ecosystem in Singapore and then outside of Singapore as well, is there are 3 factors really. The first one really is in terms of the readiness they already had before pre-COVID. And I think that was what was touched upon. If you were already at a mature level from a digitization perspective to have the infrastructure, you were more quickly able to adapt, right? So that's definitely one element of the resiliency. The second piece of it is how do I look at my decision-making process? And I directly correlate that to agility. Of course, agility is an oft-used word. I think you should use that as one of your unprecedented categories. But
buzzword
really being is agility cuts across various aspects of operations. And we've seen mixed. Certain organizations have said, this is a different time. My approach towards decision-making is different. It's faster. I will rather get it approximately right than get it accurately wrong, to Linus's point. I've just made it a little more, but that's what you kind of referred. Versus we still have organizations who take a view that, no, this is my process. So there's a bureaucracy associated with it, and that has a direct impact in terms of resilience. The third concept from a resilience perspective I would like to kind of talk about is, and I'll state Korea as an example, and we've got one of the electric power organizations within Korea, and I'll take that specifically as an example. Korea got hit after China. It was one of the first countries to kind of get hit in terms of the COVID bit of it. Sorry, should I? Can I go ahead? Sorry. Okay, so Korea was one of the earliest countries that got hit with COVID, and they needed to take some very important measures in terms of work from home, etc. So suddenly it was thousands of employees in remote parts of Korea who needed to have access to their workspace without having to go there to their workplace and do work. So very quickly to be able to deploy it. Then Korea also was able to, like Singapore actually, was able to kind of stabilize the COVID situation. What are they doing now from a resiliency perspective is also very critical for organizations. Things have slowed down a bit. They're ahead of the curve in terms of testing. They're ahead of the curve in terms of stabilizing it. What can I do now when the next round hits me? Or maybe it's not COVID, it's the next pandemic that hits me. How am I going to beef up my infrastructure? So these three things are very critical.
Right.
I wanted to make one key important point as we have COVID and organizations responding to this. Another big difference between SARS 10 years ago and now, or more than 10 years ago than now, is the information feed that we see in our world. Massive information feed translating to opinions, translating to customer and citizen behavior. It's much more diverse, and when you get into an extreme level of diversity, it becomes polarized, as we're seeing in some parts of the world. This is because certain information with artificial intelligence is fed in a certain manner to a certain group of people. So it is becoming an increasingly important part for government agencies and corporations alike to deal with this very diverse set of customer needs to be able to meet that. And the people who get that right are also we are seeing as being more resilient in the marketplace.
Cool. It's a good point, and it's a great segue to one of the questions, although it's a slightly different angle to the massive amount of information we're getting. I think what you're alluding to is the amount of opinions and the targeted segmentation that we're going to look at. But the question that came in is that for the essential, I'll just read it out, the essential services organizations are collecting, sharing, and using a lot more personal information now ever than before, especially within this short 6 to 9 months period. So how are your organizations stepping up data protection efforts? I think in the earlier panel, there was a similar question. I think this is top on the mind of a lot of people. So perhaps any of the panelists, including those remotely, your thoughts in terms of how your organization has responded in stepping up on data protection efforts. Linus?
Well, maybe let me take it.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, I'll start. So actually, if you look at healthcare, what have we collected more than before COVID? I think right now we're asking a little bit more in terms of contact information, right? Have you been this place and that and the other? But that's also not a whole lot more compared to prior, because if you recall before COVID, we had MERS, there was Ebola. We were already asking some of these questions as to whether you were in Africa or whether... So it's added on to that. But what's happened, at least in some of our markets, like in Singapore, thanks to GovTech in a way with Trace Together and Safe Entry, we could actually stop collecting some of that ourselves and rely on that infrastructure. Of course, that's not available in all of our countries, so therefore some countries we still had to collect it ourselves. But having the back-end tools, the quick ability to turn around, we've migrated a lot of our footprint into Office 365. And fortunately, we could do that, so which means that we could create quick forms to capture that information. Now, when we collect that, those forms of contact trace and all that, immediately that goes into a secure storage electronically, and it falls into the realm of what we've been putting in place already in terms of the cybersecurity setup. We're not perfect, okay? I think we still have to be very careful, and you're right. The number of attempts to hack in has just gone through the roof. Right. So we still need to heighten our protection. We have to keep just one step ahead as much as possible. But the good thing is, at least with all the things that we prepared for, it's different from when we were collecting all that information on paper. So when you collected contact information, identity information, so that you can call back the person, and all that contact history on paper. that would have been a lot worse in terms of PDPA, and every country has implemented that. So in a way, I would say we've not necessarily done a whole lot more in terms of what we're collecting, but fundamentally for healthcare, it's all about trust. And we've just made sure that what we have is just hopefully one step ahead. I would say we're still keeping running on that treadmill, trying to make sure that we are ahead. Just to make sure we maintain that trust with our patients. So that's something that we've been doing.
Well, thanks a lot, Linus.
Yeah.
I think, Jason, just nice because Linus spoke about depending on you for some parts of the data. So perhaps you could share what GovTech is.
Depending on GovTech
GovTech's take on this.
yes. So I think the first thing to remember is we are collecting this additional data. I think, Linus, you mentioned it. It's mainly for contact tracing purposes. It's for the purposes of responding to the pandemic, right? And yes, I think in the early months, a lot of companies were collecting this information on pen and paper, on their own infrastructure, right? What we tried to do then is to consolidate that information in a digital manner so that it can be properly protected. So you don't have 2 sheets of paper flying around, but more importantly, so that when you have a case and MOH needs to figure out where this person has been and who else he might have been in contact with, there is a hard handoff. There's literally an air gap between I need to get this data in a database, and that data is sitting in loose sheets of paper all around Singapore. Right? So that's really, I think, the first order objective. But like in any data policy or data governance setup or framework, there's always a notion of minimization of data. So we moved amendments to we moved changes to guidelines in PDPA recently. Basically suppressed the collection of NRIC information. That was an exception that I think PDPC made at the beginning of this year because the importance of the identity information for contact tracing was critical, right? So we got that. But on the back end, I think, rest assured, we've been looking at, cybersecurity measures. We're working very closely with the Cybersecurity Agency in Singapore to make sure that all the information that is being collected from the public health perspective is properly protected. But also in terms of the design of some of the systems, like if you look at Trace Together, all the information that's collected, we get around some of the cybersecurity risk by leaving the information on the user's own device in an encrypted format. It's encrypted at rest, it's encrypted in transit. There is no way to unmask the identifier without the key that is held all the way back in the central server. And all of those things, I hope we've done enough. It's always like Linus and I think Alvin, you mentioned earlier on, it's a bit of an arms race, right? So we've always got to be on the alert. But I think we've tried to make sure that as this additional information is collected, it is fit for purpose and only for the purpose that it is collected for. And we put in place the appropriate protections and ethical safeguards around the usage of that data.
Thanks, Jason.
Can I add to that since it's cybersecurity? So in cybersecurity, we always say that the first thing is it all starts with visibility. Do you know where your data are, right? So, and based on what I said earlier, there are a lot of data that has gone out into the cloud, into the software as a service, into the infrastructure as a service, and now into the work from home desktop or laptops as well. And of course, some of this data will be encrypted, but it's all about the visibility. Do you have data there that is not encrypted, for example? Are you able to find out faster? And actually, it's arms race. And in that arms race, we ask ourselves, how much time do we have? And can we speed it up some more? So I like to challenge this concept, right? Because I think when I speak to a lot of organizations, they say, hey, I spent a lot of money on cybersecurity so far. I have visibility. So I like to challenge that by saying, if there's a way to improve that visibility, what would it look like? Does it mean you get visibility faster? Does it mean you get visibility in a more complete fashion? There has to be a way for us to push that boundary, because only by pushing the boundary can we improve.
Cool. Oh, thanks, Alvin.
Sorry, you're probably running out of
Sorry,
time.
go
I
ahead.
think all of us have an opinion on this one. So, and it is an important topic. So maybe very quickly, I think it's just this balance, right, that all of us are facing, which is how do we make it easier for my customer, for the citizen, versus how secure can that be, right? It's always the trade-off and a balance over here. And at Citrix, we extend the usage of applications, etc., to other devices, other locations. You could be sitting in a Starbucks doing your work, for example, making it more flexible. Which means now there's another point of failure, which is users who are not sitting in the office, who are sitting outside, who become a potential point of failure. So our methodology and philosophy is what we call it the zero trust methodology, which is essentially saying that I'm not going to trust any point over here, and I'm going to fundamentally, through the user experience, question whether this person is the right person, and is he or she doing the right thing that he or she is supposed to be doing, and is he or she is accessing the right information that he or she is expected to do. So there's a lot of stuff that is happening over there. So security threat is not necessarily from external. It is, but it now becomes more, can be internal as well, because there's a working population that is stepping out of the office boundaries, getting access to information. And sometimes it's accidental. It's not intentional. But information security, etc., becomes a big issue. So this is our philosophy of extending the security.
Right. Well, thanks a lot, Prem. Maybe we'll jump across time zones and get to Sim, because I'd love to hear the view in terms of how Estonia is thinking about this.
Well, two things to just possibly add. What I would say is I also agree with the colleagues here that we don't necessarily gather too much more than we used to. But what we have just seen instead is that so we are bringing in quite a lot new people to help out with the efforts, right? So even in contact tracing, I mean, there is quite a bit of manual backend. So our health services had to bring in special sort of folks who had not been perhaps as used to high level of data protections before. And so what I'm trying to say is that so still the human factor matters quite a bit as well, ensuring that those folks who are now working with us or on the response have the proper cyber hygiene and skills and know-how, and just basically keep it up. So my answer, I think, or our challenge has been not in terms of stepping up the efforts, but just ensuring that the efforts we have made and the practices we have put in place just keep at it, and we don't loosen them somehow just because we have this urgent need.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Sim. The folks, I'm mindful of time, but I think we will squeeze in one last question. Because you guys spoke about the arms race, spoke of the need to have trade-offs, to balance and to try. But the core of it is about the citizen. It's about building trust. Perhaps if you can have a 10-second elevator pitch in terms of what your advice would be in terms of how do you make sure that you can retain and build that trust? Because the road will continue to evolve. But what is your short advice in terms of how do you retain that trust with the citizens? Anyone can start. Anyone that has a 10-second idea.
So maybe I'll start. Yeah, I think to retain trust is about being reliable, being credible, and always being transparent. And so in order for us to be reliable and to be transparent, we actually do need to have that visibility faster, so that when we talk with the knowledge behind us, and we are not just speculating on what it might be. So that's my 10-second spiel. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for Alvin. It sounds like a product pitch. Very good.
Why don't I continue? Trust is really something that's so key to healthcare. For us, I guess the first thing you have to do is we need to build that trust with our employees. Right? Look after your people. Yes. Look after your people, maintain that trust so that they trust you. And eventually that carries on to what we do for our patients. And that extends out.
So building it inside out.
Yep.
Awesome. Was it Sim or Jason?
Yeah, Jason. On trust, I mean, that's so much a part of what we do now with, we were talking about safe entry and trace together. Transparency is important, communication is important, and also having some regard for the ethics of what we are building together, right? So trace together, we don't do location data, it's all proximity data. We've been very transparent about the fact that information is stored out there. We've open sourced the code, we published it so people can inspect it. People have also reverse engineered our app. I don't condone it, but I think you can see very clearly that the retention of the data, the way the data is handled, the fact that it only flows to the server if you're infected. Those are all, I think, ways in which, at least for one of those systems, we've helped and we've tried to, to preserve trust and maintain that transparency. And then I think it comes down to communicate, right? And we were talking earlier about the polarization of information around the pandemic. I think the only antidote to misinformation is better information. And so we found that we've had to communicate, what we've been doing, why we're doing it at every step of the way, going into circuit breaker, coming out of circuit breaker, moving from phase 1 to phase 2, and hopefully eventually phase 3. And I think if we get all of that right, then we will be in a better position to exit this not only as a healthier society, but also as a stronger society. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Sim or Prem?
Okay. Maybe we let Sim take it, and then I'll do,
Huh.
and I'll respond.
Cheers. Well, just
Cheers.
two very quick things. I think just echoing what we have been saying here, and again, like from a Stone experience, you got to have your foundations down. So basically, whether it's there's people with cyber hygiene, whether it's basically having strong enough data protection levels, or just being digital for that matter. So foundations is where it starts with. But secondly, it also, I think trust is by this point not anymore that not faith in that you will keep stuff secure, but it's also that the people want to see momentum. So keep experimenting, keep trying stuff out, bringing stuff out, delivering. I think that sort of is the key part in the end too. Not just the foundations, not just keeping stuff as it is, but always going forward.
Good. Thanks so much, Sim. And Prem, bring us home.
So a couple of points. First point is trying to make it more convenient to the citizens. I think they're doing a great job in Singapore over here, trying to make it more convenient, and also be a little bit more open about the fact that mistakes are going to happen along the way, and acknowledge it and get on with it, because I think everybody is dealing with an unknown. And the second point, I completely agree with Linus's point, and this is what we at Citrix are driving as well. It is get that employee experience, employee satisfaction in place, because there's a lot about productivity as well. People are saying, I can't see him, is he really working? And then that boils down to trust and boils down to mechanisms to be able to understand that they are doing their work. So get that piece of it right in terms of employee satisfaction, making it easier for him or her to be able to do their job. It will extend to customer satisfaction.
Great.
These are the 2 points.
Thanks a lot, Prem. So folks, I'm sure you have a lot more questions that, to tap on the expertise of our panel. Do reach out to them separately through LinkedIn or through other contacts. I'm sure they will have more to share. But do join me in thanking our panelists. We have Elvin, we have Linus, we have Prem, we have Jason, and all the way from Estonia, Sim.